You're looking for a lift that actually fits the way you work, not a piece of equipment that sounds impressive on paper but ends up being a headache on the floor. You want something you can trust day in day out, that won't take forever to learn, and that won't chew through your budget before it even sees a single pallet. That's the exact dilemma I faced last month when I started reorganizing the small warehouse behind my workshop, and I spent a solid week reading forums, watching how-to videos, and comparing a handful of stackers before I settled on a single model. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Vestil SE/HP63AA is a hand pump powered stacker that lets you switch between manual and deke motor lift modes. At first glance, it feels like a hybrid between a classic pallet jack and a tiny electric forklift, but the real question is whether that hybrid actually solves the everyday problems of a modest-scale operation. Let's walk through what matters once the box is opened, the batteries are charged, and you start loading the first pallet. First off, the adjustable forks are the kind of small-scale flexibility you only notice when you have to move more than one size of load. I've got standard 48-inch pallets for most of my inventory, but occasionally a bulk order arrives on a larger 52-inch skid. The forks slide out and lock into place without any tools, so you can swap between the two sizes in under a minute. That means you're not stuck buying a second stacker just because one load is a little wider. It also saves you the time spent hunting for a different piece of equipment when a customer drops off a non-standard crate. Portability is another claim the manufacturer makes, and it's not just marketing fluff. The handle is shaped so you can pivot the whole unit onto its wheels and roll it out of a tight aisle without having to lift it. In my shop, the aisles are only about 3 feet wide, and I can swing the stacker around corners by simply dragging the handle, not by repositioning the entire machine. If you ever need to store it at night, you can tilt it onto its legs, and the legs lock into a low-profile stance that keeps it from rolling away. For anyone who doesn't have a dedicated docking station or a permanent storage rack, that kind of on-the-go convenience translates into real saved square footage. The dual-mode lifting is where the SE/HP63AA tries to win over both the budget-conscious and the time-sensitive. When you plug in the DC motor, the stacker lifts a 2,000-pound load to a maximum height of 63 inches in roughly 6 seconds per lift. That's fast enough to keep a small shipping line moving without forcing you to wait for a full-size forklift. On the other hand, the hand pump can be engaged when you run low on battery or when you're in a spot without a power outlet. The pump feels solid. You get a steady, controllable rise, which is handy for precision placement on a shelf. The trade-off is that the manual mode is slower, and you'll feel the effort if you're constantly stacking heavy loads. If you're the type who prefers a single, always an electric drive, the manual option may feel like an unnecessary complication. Now, let's talk about the height range. The stacker can lower to just over 2 inches, which is perfect for picking up pallets that are sitting directly on the concrete floor. The top height of 63 inches works well for standard warehouse racks that sit around 5 feet high, but if your storage system reaches 8 or 9 feet, you'll quickly find the stacker hitting its ceiling. In that scenario, you'd have to offload to a higher capacity lift or use a forklift for the final lift. So, if your operation revolves around low to mid-height shelving, the height range is a sweet spot. If you need to reach the top of taller racks, you'll be looking at a different class of equipment. One practical weakness that only shows up after a few weeks of use is the stability when you're lifting near the upper limit. The base is fairly wide, but with a full 2,000-pound load at 60 inches, the center of gravity pushes out enough that any uneven floor or a sudden jolt can make the unit wobble. I discovered that on a slightly uneven concrete slab, the stacker would sway a little when I stopped the lift at the top. The solution is simple: make sure the floor is level where you operate, or place a thin piece of plywood under the forks to even out the surface. It's not a design flaw, but it's a real-world consideration that can catch a first-time buyer off guard. Another point to weigh is the power source. The DC motor runs off a standard 24-volt battery pack that you have to charge separately. The charger is not included, so you'll need to buy one or use a compatible charger you already own. That adds a small extra cost, and you'll have to manage charging cycles to avoid being